Picture this. You are standing in the dimly lit, cavernous halls of the Inquisition in Rome. The year is 1633. The air is thick with incense, and the cold, damp scent of institutional power. Before a fearsome tribunal stands an old man. He is frail, suffering from a painful hernia. His eyesight is rapidly failing, and he is absolutely broken. After months of grueling interrogation, psychological torment, and the looming threat of physical torture, he finally sinks to his knees. He is forced to read a humiliating public confession, cursing and detesting his own life's work, the mathematically proven truth that the Earth orbits the Sun. As he struggles to his feet and steps down from the stand, legend says he mutters defiantly under his breath, "Eppur si muove." And yet it moves. It is arguably the most cinematic, triumphant moment in the entire history of science, painted as the ultimate unyielding stand of pure reason against the blind, tyrannical force of dogmatic authority. It is the perfect story. But there is a profound problem. It almost certainly never happened. There is absolutely no documentary evidence from the trial, the inquisitors, or the immediate aftermath that he ever uttered those words in that room. The myth of the lone, flawless, completely rational scientific martyr is a fabricated morality play designed to make history feel neat and simple. The true story of Galileo Galilei is exponentially wilder, deeply controversial, and far more flawed and human than the polished legend. When you strip away the centuries of myth-making, you do not find a secular saint. You find a man of massive, glaring contradictions. Welcome to Legendary Lives Unveiled. If you are captivated by the untamed truths of history, please subscribe and journey with us as we explore the entire multidimensional life of a man you only thought you knew. We are tracking the journey of a college dropout who used complex, bleeding-edge math to literally map the structural architecture of hell, and a genius whose most passionate, aggressive proof that the Earth was moving was ironically, completely, and utterly wrong. To truly grasp the magnitude of what this man did, you must transport yourself back to late 16th century Europe and understand the literal bedrock of reality at that time. For 2,000 years, the philosophy of the ancient Greek thinker Aristotle ruled the universities not just as a prevailing theory, but as the definitive, unquestionable physics of the world. Aristotle taught that heavy things naturally fall toward the center of the universe. Light things naturally rise to the heavens, and crucially, that the Earth sits dead center in the cosmos, massive, heavy, and utterly motionless. Wrapping entirely around that scientific bedrock was the absolute authority of the Catholic Church, which ruled the spiritual, political, and intellectual realms. The geocentric model, with the Earth parked permanently at the center, was woven into the very fabric of European theology. The heavens were considered perfect, immutable, divine, and made of a mysterious fifth element called ether. To challenge the motionless Earth was not just considered bad science. It was perceived as a direct existential threat to the entire cosmic and social order. Pulling the thread of a moving Earth threatened to unravel the tapestry of how humanity understood its relationship with God, salvation, and the universe. You would logically think the man who successfully unraveled that massive tapestry would be groomed in an elite observatory, surrounded by the greatest astronomical minds. But the spark for the scientific revolution arguably started in 1564 in Pisa, with a man playing a lute. Galileo's father, Vincenzo Galilei, was a lutenist, a renowned music theorist, and a massive rebel against the establishment. Formal church music at the time was highly rigid, dominated by traditional rules of polyphony, which meant multiple independent melody lines being sung simultaneously. Vincenzo hated this mathematical complexity, feeling that competing voices muddied the words and destroyed the emotional impact of the music. He advocated for a single voice accompanied by simple chords to bring the emotional depth of poetry and Greek mythology back into music. A radical movement that actually paved the way for the invention of Italian opera. The drive for clarity over complexity started in the arts before it ever hit the sciences. Vincenzo was an experimenter who actively bridged the gap between artistic intuition and hard physics. He refused to accept ancient Pythagorean musical theories on blind authority. The ancients claimed that to make a note an octave higher, you simply double the tension on the string. Vincenzo set up physical experiments right in his home, attaching different lead weights to his lute strings to see exactly how tension affected the pitch. He discovered something incredible that the ancient Greeks had completely missed. The pitch of a stretched string varies with the square root of its tension. It is not a direct 1-to-1 ratio. If you want a note to be an octave higher, you must multiply the tension by 4, and for a perfect fifth, you multiply the tension by roughly 2.25. Vincenzo quantified harmony, proving that ancient revered authority means absolutely nothing if it cannot survive a physical experiment. Little Galileo grew up watching his father hang lead weights from lute strings to prove the greatest minds of antiquity wrong. Learning that you do not find truth by reading old dusty books, but by asking nature directly through experiment and translating the answer into the language of mathematics. This brings us to an 18-year-old Galileo standing in the cavernous cathedral of Pisa. He was supposed to be studying medicine at the university to fulfill his father's practical wishes for a lucrative, respectable job. Instead of memorizing anatomy texts, he was mesmerized by a chandelier swinging from the cathedral ceiling, likely bumped by a sacristan lighting candles. He noticed something deeply counterintuitive. Whether the chandelier took a massive wide swing right after being bumped, or a very narrow, gentle swing as it lost momentum, the time it took to complete one full back-and-forth motion seemed exactly the same. In the 16th century, there were no stopwatches or smartphones. Mechanical clocks existed, but were massive tower clocks with only an hour hand. To time the swinging chandelier, he placed his fingers on his wrist and used his pulse. A wide swing took 5 heartbeats, and a narrow swing still took 5 heartbeats. He discovered isochronism, the equal duration of the pendulum swing regardless of amplitude. A physician friend named Santorio took this principle and invented the pulselogium, a device using a pendulum with an adjustable string length to accurately measure patients' heart rates. For the very first time in human history, medicine had a standardized, objective measurement of time, laying the exact groundwork for the pendulum clock that would later change how humanity tracks time. Despite revolutionizing medicine by staring at a ceiling, Galileo despised studying it. He hated the memorization and the reliance on ancient texts from Galen, prompting him to drop out of the University of Pisa to pursue pure mathematics. At 20 years old, a college dropout with no degree, he miraculously scored an invitation to give a lecture to the highly prestigious Florentine Academy. His topic was Dante's Inferno. He approached the epic poem as a physicist and an architect. In the poem, hell is described as a massive funnel-shaped cavern, descending to the center of the earth, neatly divided into 9 descending levels. The Academy, filled with Renaissance intellectuals, was having a fierce, completely serious debate about the exact dimensions and structural geometry of this fictional underworld, treating a theological landscape as a strict engineering problem. Galileo stepped up and began doing the math on the devil's real estate. Using complex geometry, and scaling laws to calculate the necessary thickness of the ice at the bottom of the ninth circle, and the structural limits of the cavern walls, trying to determine if it could support its own immense weight without collapsing inward. His early math had significant flaws regarding scaling, specifically the square cube law. He assumed you could scale up a small arch to the size of a continent, and it would hold, not realizing that as an object gets bigger, its volume and weight grow exponentially faster than its structural strength. A giant Lucifer would actually collapse under his own body weight, but the flaws were not the point. The sheer audacity of treating a sacred theological concept as a strict mathematical problem stunned everyone, showing that this young dropout had a brilliant, entirely unconventional mind. This bizarre lecture built his reputation and eventually landed him a teaching job at the University of Pisa at just 25 years old. The moment he secured that platform, he targeted the biggest, most untouchable concept in all of academia: Aristotle's theories of motion. Aristotle claimed that heavy objects fall faster than light objects. He reasoned that a 10-kilogram rock has more earth in it, so it desires to get to the center of the earth faster, meaning it must fall exactly twice as fast as a 5-kilogram rock. It makes intuitive sense to uncritical observation due to air resistance. But before Galileo ever dropped a single physical object, he completely dismantled this 2,000-year-old dogma, using pure, inescapable logic in an absolute masterpiece of human reasoning. Imagine a heavy 10-kilogram stone and a lighter 5-kilogram stone. According to Aristotle, the heavy stone falls quickly and the light stone falls slowly. Now imagine tying them together with a sturdy piece of string and dropping them at the same time. If Aristotle is right, the lighter, slower falling stone should act as a drag, pulling back on the string like a parachute and slowing down the heavier stone. The tied together stones should fall slower than the heavy stone alone. However, tying a 10-kilogram stone and a 5-kilogram stone together creates a new combined object, weighing 15 kilograms. By Aristotle's own fundamental rule, a heavier object must always fall faster. Therefore, the 15-kilogram object must fall faster than the 10-kilogram object. Aristotle's theory simultaneously demands that the tied stones must fall slower due to drag and faster due to the combined weight. With one elegant, bulletproof thought experiment, Galileo exposed a fatal logical paradox, utterly destroying a 1,000-year-old dogma before a string was even cut. But destroying a theory in the mind was only the beginning. The real challenge lay in measuring a physical force moving far too fast for the primitive tools of the 16th century. We have all heard the legendary image that immediately follows this realization. He marches up the winding stairs to the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. He leans over the edge and he drops 2 cannonballs of different weights to show the dumbfounded crowd below that they hit the ground at the exact same time. It is in every children's science book, but historians fiercely debate if it actually happened. The story was written down by his disciple, Vincenzo Viviani, much later, long after Galileo had died. While he may have done some public demonstrations to annoy his colleagues, Galileo's real, documented genius was not in dropping things off towers. The reality of physics is that things fall way too fast to measure accurately with the primitive tools of the 16th century. If you drop a ball off a tower, it hits the ground in a couple of seconds, meaning you simply cannot track its acceleration. His real genius was figuring out how to slow down gravity. He achieved this by turning to inclined planes. He took beautifully polished, incredibly smooth wooden ramps and lined the grooves with parchment to make them as frictionless as possible. Then he rolled smooth, perfectly spherical bronze balls down them. By putting gravity on a slight tilt, he essentially diluted its effect. making the balls roll slowly enough that he actually had time to measure their progress. But once again, he runs into the technology problem. He has no stopwatch, and his pulse is not accurate enough for fractions of a second. How on earth do you time a ball rolling down a ramp with the mathematical precision needed to invent modern physics? He built a highly customized water clock. He set up a large vessel of water elevated above his workbench with a tiny, incredibly thin pipe attached to the bottom. He would hold a small glass under the pipe the exact moment he let go of the bronze ball at the top of the ramp. He used his other hand to open the pipe and let the water trickle into the glass. The split second the ball hit the end of the ramp, he snapped the pipe shut. Then he took that glass and weighed the trapped water on an incredibly precise jeweler's scale. It is beautifully clever. He literally translated time into mass. By comparing the weights of the water from different runs, he was comparing the exact ratios of time. He did not know what a second was, but he knew that 50 grains of water equaled a certain amount of time, and 100 grains equaled twice as much time. Through this agonizingly repetitive, meticulous experimentation, he redefines motion completely. Formulating the law of freefall, he mathematically proves that the distance an object travels is directly proportional to the square of the time it takes. It does not fall at constant speed. It continuously accelerates. Out of this exhaustive work, he begins to formulate the principle of inertia, which is where he completely shatters the ancient mindset. Aristotle believed that an object had to be pushed continuously by some invisible force to keep moving. If you throw a spear, Aristotle thought the air swirling behind it was pushing it forward, and if you stop pushing, it naturally stops. But Galileo looked at his ramps and realized something entirely different. Gravity makes a ball speed up rolling down a ramp, and gravity makes it slow down rolling up a ramp. Therefore, what happens if you roll it on a perfectly flat, infinitely long, perfectly frictionless horizontal plane? It wouldn't have any reason to speed up, and it wouldn't have any reason to slow down. Imagine you are on a frozen lake, sliding a hockey puck on a sheet of perfectly smooth, endlessly flat ice in a vacuum. It would just glide forever, because the ice isn't pushing it, the air isn't pushing it, it just keeps doing exactly what it's doing. Because absolutely nothing is actively stopping it. Galileo shifted the entire focus of physics. For 1,000 years, philosophers asked where an object was naturally trying to go, attributing desire to rocks. Galileo said we must stop asking where it wants to go, because objects do not have desires. Instead, let's ask exactly how it gets there. He shifted the focus of science from philosophical teleology to mathematical time and acceleration. He mathematized motion. Honestly, if he had stopped his career right there, he would still be cemented in the history books as the father of modern mechanics. But then the calendar turns to the year 1609. He is now living in Padua, teaching at the university, and everything changes. A rumor emerges that a Dutch spectacle maker has supposedly invented a curious little tube with lenses inside that makes distant objects look 3 times closer. It is essentially being sold as a carnival toy or a novelty for generals to look at enemy troops. Galileo never even sees the original Dutch spyglass. He only hears a description of it. But relying on his deep theoretical knowledge of optics, refraction, and geometry, he immediately grasps the terrifying potential of this toy and reverse engineers the concept in his head. You have to understand the immense physical labor involved here. 17th century glass was terrible. It was full of tiny air bubbles, had a green tint from iron impurities, and was wildly uneven. He cannot just go buy better lenses. He has to make them. He spends weeks grinding his own lenses by hand in his workshop, turning his hands raw. He needs a perfectly convex, objective lens for the front and a perfectly concave eyepiece for the back. The alignment has to be flawless to avoid chromatic aberration, where the colors split and blur the image. Through sheer, exhausting trial and error, he quickly ramps up the magnification of his device from 3 times to 8 times, and eventually to an astonishing 20 times magnification. A quantum leap in optical technology in a matter of months. He takes this 20 power tube, and instead of looking at ships on the horizon, he points it straight up to the sky. In a single frenzied year of observation, he writes a small explosive book called Sidereus Nuncius, The Starry Messenger. It is basically a relentless barrage of celestial discoveries that absolutely shatters the heavens. It is vital to pause and truly understand the philosophical devastation these discoveries caused. It wasn't just observing neat space phenomena. He was actively destroying the theological architecture of reality. Take the moon. The Church, leaning heavily on Aristotle, taught that all celestial bodies above the earth were made of an incorruptible, divine substance. They were supposed to be perfectly smooth, unblemished, immutable spheres. But when Galileo looks through his telescope, he does not see a perfect sphere. He sees shadows, and he sees jagged, erratic edges along the terminator line, the dividing line between the light and dark sides of the moon. Because he understands how shadows fall on geometry from his art training, he realizes exactly what he is looking at. He is looking at mountain ranges and massive, violent craters. The moon is not a perfect divine orb at all. It is rocky, it is bumpy, it is rugged, and it is deeply flawed. It is terrifyingly just like Earth. Next, he points his tube at the Milky Way. For centuries, philosophers thought the Milky Way was just a cloudy atmospheric mist, perhaps reflecting light from other bodies. Galileo's telescope cuts through the blur and resolves that mist into countless individual pinpoint stars. Suddenly, the universe isn't a tight, cozy sphere just past the orbit of Saturn. It is infinitely deeper, overwhelmingly crowded, and vastly larger than human comprehension had ever allowed. And then comes the real knockout blow. He looks at the planet Jupiter. He notices 3 and eventually 4 tiny little stars lined up in a perfectly straight line near it. Night after night, he maps their positions, tracking them as they disappear behind Jupiter and reappear on the other side. The realization hits him. They aren't background stars. They are orbiting Jupiter. He has discovered moons. The implications of Jupiter's moons were staggering. The absolute, non-negotiable core of the geocentric model was that the Earth was the single, solitary center of all rotation in the universe. Everything must orbit us, and if anything orbited something else, the whole system collapsed. But here, through a glass tube, was undeniable, visible proof of a secondary center of motion. If Jupiter can physically move through space while hauling 4 massive moons around it, then surely the Earth can move through space while hauling its single moon around it. The argument that the Earth would leave the moon behind if it moved was instantly destroyed. But he didn't stop there. He looked at Venus, and if Jupiter was a heavy blow, Venus was the executioner's axe for the old system. He observed Venus over many months and saw that it goes through distinct phases, exactly like our moon, transitioning from a thin sliver crescent to a full, completely illuminated disk. Under the old Ptolemaic system, Venus's orbit sits entirely between the Earth and the Sun. If Venus is always trapped between us and the light source, it is geometrically impossible for Venus to ever appear fully illuminated from Earth's perspective. It should only ever be a crescent. The fact that Galileo observed a full Venus meant that Venus must travel entirely behind the Sun. The phases of Venus were the absolute geometric nail in the coffin for the Earth-centered model. Venus must orbit the Sun. And just for good measure, just to rub salt in the wound of perfection, he points a telescope at the Sun itself, which damaged his eyes. He finds sunspots, dark, transient blemishes that move across the surface, proving that the Sun rotates on an axis, and once again, is not a perfect, unblemished celestial object. It's almost comical how thoroughly he dismantled their worldview in a matter of months. It is arguably the most disruptive sequence of scientific discoveries ever published in a single work. In just 60 pages, he invalidated 2 millennia of cosmology. Here is where it gets incredibly dangerous. Galileo wasn't just a brilliant scientist sitting alone in a dark room. He was a master networker and an incredibly savvy, ambitious political operator. He knows these discoveries are dangerous, but he also knows they are the ultimate ticket to unprecedented wealth, status, and freedom from his grueling teaching schedule. To seize that power, he was about to make a highly calculated gamble, one that would drag him directly into the crosshairs of the most powerful religious institution on Earth. So what does he do with the moons of Jupiter? He monetizes them. He names them the Medicean stars, after Cosimo II de' Medici, the immensely powerful Grand Duke of Tuscany. It was a brilliant, highly calculated move of patronage. He didn't just dedicate a book to the Duke. He literally put the Medici name in the heavens, inextricably linking the ruling family to the cosmic order for eternity. In return for handing them the stars, Galileo secured himself a lifetime appointment as the chief philosopher and mathematician to the Grand Duke in Florence. He got a massive salary, no teaching duties whatsoever, and the freedom to do pure, unadulterated research. It is the 17th century equivalent of securing unlimited venture capital funding. But with that massive visibility comes intense, dangerous scrutiny. You have tied yourself to the rulers, which means the church can no longer ignore you. As we move into the 1610s, the storm clouds are rapidly gathering. The church is starting to get very, very nervous about this loud mathematician in Florence. We have to contextualize this. It is 1616, and the Catholic Church is in the throes of the Counter-Reformation. Decades earlier, Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation had deeply, violently shaken the Church's absolute monopoly on interpreting Scripture. Millions of souls and massive territories were lost. In this highly defensive, paranoid atmosphere, the absolute last thing the Vatican wants is a layman, a mathematician no less, publicly telling theologians that they are reading the Bible incorrectly based on what he sees through a tube. Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, who is arguably the most brilliant and powerful theologian of the era, decides he has to step in. Now, it is easy to picture the church here as just a monolithic group of anti-science thugs in robes. But if you actually read Bellarmine's letters, the man was incredibly sharp. He wasn't rejecting math. He was arguing about epistemology, about what math actually represents. Bellarmine takes what modern philosophers call an instrumentalist view of science. He calls Galileo in and essentially tells him that using the Copernican sun-centered math as a calculating tool to predict planetary positions and fix the calendar is perfectly fine. It is a highly efficient mathematical model, but you cannot claim that it is physically real. You cannot go around teaching that the Earth is actually hurtling through physical space, because that directly contradicts the literal interpretation of Scripture, which clearly speaks of the sun moving across the sky and the Earth standing absolutely firm. Bellarmine is saying math is just a model, not reality. So in 1616, Galileo is hauled in and given a formal private warning by the Inquisition. He is ordered not to hold or defend the heliocentric theory as physical truth. He can use it for calculations, but he cannot say it is real. And for a while, a tense, silent decade, Galileo complies. He goes back to Florence and keeps his head down. But this is where we have to look closely at Galileo, the human being. He was undeniably brilliant, but he was also deeply arrogant, fiercely combative, remarkably thin-skinned, and sometimes he was just completely wrong. This is the part of the story that always gets conveniently left out of the legend. We think of him as having a flawless track record, a man who never made a mistake. But we have to talk about the comets. In 1618, 3 massive blazing comets appeared in the European sky, and everyone panicked. A highly respected Jesuit astronomer named Orazio Grassi published a scientific treatise correctly arguing, based on the parallax effect and the meticulous data of Tycho Brahe, that these comets were physical celestial bodies orbiting out beyond the moon. Now, Galileo despised Grassi. He despised the Jesuits in general, viewing them as dogmatic rivals, and he couldn't stand the idea of them being right. So Galileo writes a book called The Assayer in 1623. It is universally recognized as a masterpiece of sarcastic, vicious, rhetorical brilliance. He absolutely shreds Grassi's arguments, insulting his intelligence on every page. But scientifically, Galileo argued that comets weren't physical objects at all. He stubbornly claimed they were just sublunary optical illusions, tricks of atmospheric refraction, like a rainbow. Galileo was entirely wrong, and the Jesuits he was brutally mocking were entirely, demonstrably right. He let his ego completely override his scientific method. And it wasn't just comets. We have to talk about his grand theory of the ocean tides. Galileo was desperate, absolutely desperate, to find a physical, undeniable proof that the Earth was moving. He thought he found the smoking gun in the tides. He argued that the tides were caused by the physical sloshing of the Earth's oceans as the planet violently spun on its axis and simultaneously orbited the sun. Imagine carrying a wide, shallow pan of water across a room while spinning in a circle. The water sloshes back and forth. Now, at this exact same time, Johannes Kepler, another towering giant of the scientific revolution working up in Prague, had correctly theorized that the tides were caused by the invisible gravitational pull of the moon acting on the water. But Galileo violently rejected Kepler's idea. He dismissed the concept of invisible linear gravity as astrological nonsense and occult magic. He was so fiercely, dogmatically committed to purely mechanical, observable motion, things bumping into other things, that he mocked the correct answer. He doubled down on his sloshing Earth theory, completely ignoring the fact that his own math didn't actually support it. The actual ocean tides cycle every 12 hours, but Galileo's sloshing theory demanded a 24-hour cycle. He just hand-waved away the discrepancy. What is fascinating here is how these blunders highlight his dogmatic belief in his own intuition. When the data didn't fit his beautiful, mechanical model, he sometimes ignored the data. But alongside these massive scientific errors, he was formulating incredibly brilliant theological arguments to protect himself. In his famous letter to the Grand Duchess Christina, he lays out his definitive defense known as the doctrine of the two truths. This is the concept of the book of Scripture and the book of nature. Galileo argued a profound point. God is the singular author of both the Bible and the natural universe. Because God cannot contradict himself, the truths found in nature and the truths found in Scripture cannot possibly contradict each other. Therefore, if there appears to be a contradiction between physical science and a biblical verse, it is simply because human beings, in their fallibility, are misinterpreting the scripture. He argued the Bible was written in metaphor for common people, whereas nature is written in the strict, unyielding language of mathematics. As he famously quoted from Cardinal Baronius, "The Bible shows the way to go to heaven, not the way the heavens go," which is an incredibly modern, nuanced way of viewing religion and science. It is how most of the world operates today. But in 1616, telling the Vatican that a mathematician knows how to interpret the Bible better than the Pope was treading on incredibly dangerous ground. Then, in 1623, a seeming miracle happens for Galileo. His good friend, longtime admirer, and fellow intellectual, Cardinal Maffeo Barberini, is elected as Pope Urban VIII. Urban VIII was a highly cultured Renaissance man. He was deeply interested in science and loved the arts, having even written glowing poetry praising Galileo's telescopic discoveries. When Urban becomes Pope, Galileo feels a massive, intoxicating surge of false security. He sincerely believes the dark days of the 1616 warning are over, and that his friendship with the Pope effectively neutralizes the Inquisition. Emboldened and energized, he spends years writing what he believes will be his ultimate masterpiece, the book that will end the cosmic debate forever, the dialogue concerning the two chief world systems. This specific book sets the absolute stage for the trial of the millennium. Let us really unpack the format of this fatal book, because the structure is what doomed him. He didn't write a dry academic textbook, he wrote a play. It is framed as a vibrant conversation over 4 days in Venice between 3 characters. First, you have Salviati, the brilliant, articulate, flawlessly logical scientist defending the moving earth, who is clearly Galileo's personal avatar. Then you have Sagredo, the wealthy, intelligent, open-minded layman who represents the educated public, there to listen, ask questions, and ultimately be convinced by Salviati's brilliant reason. And finally, you have Simplicio. He claimed he named him after an ancient philosopher, but the name in Italian literally translates to simpleton or fool. Simplicio is the staunch, dogmatic, intellectually rigid defender of Aristotle, the Church, and the geocentric universe. Throughout the entire book, Salviati just runs absolute rhetorical circles around Simplicio, tying him in logical knots and making him look utterly foolish and backwards at every single turn. It is a devastating piece of literature. And here is the catastrophic, self-destructive betrayal. Pope Urban VIII had previously told Galileo in person that he could write a book about Copernicanism, provided he adhered to 2 strict conditions. First, he must treat the moving earth strictly as a mathematical hypothesis, not physical truth. Second, he absolutely must include the Pope's own favorite philosophical argument at the end of the book. The Pope's argument was essentially the ultimate theological trump card. He stated that God's power is infinite and fundamentally beyond human comprehension. Therefore, God could make the universe behave in ways we can never understand. Even if the sun-centered math of Copernicus works perfectly to predict the tides or planetary orbits, we cannot arrogantly presume to know that God actually created the universe that way. Doing so limits God's omnipotence, because God could achieve those same physical effects using a completely different, mysterious method that baffles our math. So Galileo technically follows the instructions. He does put the Pope's exact treasured argument into the very end of the book. But he puts the Pope's sacred words into the mouth of Simplicio, the buffoon character who has been the punching bag for the last 400 pages. After Simplicio delivers the Pope's profound theological argument, the other 2 characters essentially just smile condescendingly, agree to disagree, and go get a drink to end the conversation. It was political suicide. When the dialogue is published in 1632 and copies reach Rome, the Pope's advisors immediately read it and point this specific passage out to him. Pope Urban VIII is absolutely humiliated and furious. He feels personally mocked and betrayed by a man he considered a close friend. We must remember the brutal geopolitical context of 1632. It is the bloody height of the 30 Years' War in Europe. The Pope is under immense crushing pressure from conservative Catholic factions, particularly in Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, who are viciously accusing him of being weak on Protestant heretics to serve his own political goals. He is politically vulnerable and cannot, under any circumstances, afford to look weak, foolish, or be publicly humiliated by a wisecracking mathematician in Florence. He needs to assert his absolute authority. The hammer drops, and the protection is gone. In 1633, Galileo is summoned to Rome to face the Inquisition. He begs not to go. He is 70 years old, suffering from severe arthritis, a painful hernia, and his eyes are failing. But the Pope threatens to have him brought in chains if he doesn't come willingly, so he goes. During the trial, the Inquisition pulls a rabbit out of a hat. They produce a document from the original 1616 meeting, a supposedly absolute, legally binding injunction, specifically forbidding Galileo to hold, teach, or discuss the Copernican theory in any way whatsoever, verbally or in writing. The legality of that specific document is still fiercely debated by historians today, with many believing it was an unsigned draft, or perhaps even a forgery planted in the file, because it contradicted Bellarmine's milder written instructions. But the Inquisition wielded it like a sword, using it to accuse him not just of being wrong, but of deliberate, calculated defiance of a direct papal order. He was charged with vehement suspicion of heresy, facing the terrifying reality of a ruthless tribunal. But the true shock of this historical moment was that the Church was about to unsheath a devastating, highly rational scientific weapon against him. I must pause and push back on the modern narrative here. Looking back from the 21st century, this just looks like a massive, tyrannical, religious institution brutally crushing objective, undeniable scientific truth simply because they were insecure, anti-science monsters. But let us be intellectually honest. Was the Church completely devoid of rational scientific argument in 1633? Did they just have Bible verses, or did they have real physics on their side? If we look at this impartially, as we must to truly understand the historical reality of the era, the answer is no. The Church wasn't just blindly thumping the Bible. They actually had highly valid, rational, empirical scientific objections alongside their theological ones. One of the strongest, most devastating scientific arguments against Galileo was the problem of stellar parallax. Imagine you are driving down a highway and you look out the side window at a tree near the road. As you drive past it, the position of that tree seems to shift rapidly against the distant mountains in the background. That visual shift caused by your movement is parallax. Now apply that to the Earth. If the Earth is genuinely orbiting the Sun, hurtling millions of miles across space from one side of the solar system to the other every 6 months, then our vantage point of the stars should drastically change. The closer stars should visibly shift back and forth against the background of the more distant stars over the course of a year. It is basic geometry. If we are moving, the background must shift. But in 1633, no one, not even Galileo with his 20-power telescope, had ever observed a single millimeter of stellar parallax. We now know that the stars are so incredibly, unfathomably far away that the parallax shift is too microscopic to see without high-powered precision telescopes from the 19th century. But to the greatest scientific minds of the 17th century, the complete lack of observable parallax meant one of two things. Either the Earth isn't moving at all, or the stars are so incomprehensibly far away that the universe is a massive, terrifying, empty void of wasted space. And it gets worse for Galileo, because a contemporary opponent named Francesco Ingoli pointed out a massive flaw in the optical physics. Ingoli argued that even if we assume the Earth moves, and the stars are just mind-bogglingly far away, which would explain the lack of parallax. When we look at stars, they don't look like infinite points of light. They look like little disks. If a star is far enough away to show zero parallax, but still appears as a visible disk to the naked eye, Ingoli did the geometry and proved it mathematically meant every single star in the night sky would have to be absurdly, comically massive, literally larger than the entire orbit of the Earth around the Sun. It was an optical illusion caused by the scattering of light in the eye and in primitive telescopes, but they didn't know that yet. So Ingoli and the Church argued that a universe filled with billions of stars, each one larger than our entire solar system, separated by infinite billions of miles of empty nothingness, is physically absurd and philosophically grotesque. Therefore, the simpler, more elegant, mathematically sound solution, based on the observable data of 1633, is that the Earth is stationary. Without modern physics and advanced optics, the Church and the Aristotelian philosophers were actually defending a system that made better physical sense of the available data. The heliocentric model, at that specific moment in history, had massive, glaring physical problems it simply couldn't answer. That context changes everything. It wasn't just science versus religion. It was incomplete science versus incomplete science. But none of that complex, rational scientific debate mattered in the end, because the trial wasn't about physics. It came down to raw institutional power. Galileo is brought to the Church of Santa Maria sopra Minerva for his final sentencing. You really have to put yourself in his shoes in that room. You are 70 years old, your joints ache, and you are terrified. You have been explicitly threatened with the instruments of torture by men who have burned heretics alive in recent memory. And yet, you know with every fiber of your being that you have physically seen the truth of the cosmos through your telescope. Despite all of that, you are forced to your knees on the cold stone floor. Broken, he was forced to read aloud a prepared, humiliating text. I abjure with a sincere heart and unfeigned faith. I curse and detest the said errors and heresies. He was forced to publicly, officially deny the physical reality he had uncovered, to spit on his own legacy to save his life. Imagine the psychological weight of watching your absolute truth, the painstaking work of your entire life, crushed into dust by the sheer, unyielding weight of institutional power. It is one of the most heartbreaking, soul-crushing moments in human history. And yet, this isn't where the story ends. This brings us to the final, incredibly inspiring chapter of his life: blindness, two new sciences, and his ultimate triumph. Following his abjuration, Galileo is spared the dungeon, but his sentence is commuted to perpetual house arrest. He is shipped back to Tuscany and confined to his small villa in Arcetri, in the hills just above Florence, for the rest of his natural life. He is legally banned from ever publishing a book again, and banned from having visitors to discuss scientific matters. He is a prisoner in his own home. As the lonely years pass, the eyes that first saw the moons of Jupiter begin to fail completely, and he goes entirely, irreversibly blind. Amidst this professional ruin, He also suffers a devastating, deeply personal tragedy. During his life, Galileo had an intense, beautiful, incredibly supportive correspondence with his eldest daughter, Virginia. Because she was illegitimate, he had placed her in a convent when she was young, and she took the veil as Sister Maria Celeste. She was his absolute rock. She supported him emotionally through his trials, sewed his clothes, baked him treats, and meticulously managed his financial affairs while he was away in Rome, fighting the Inquisition. Just months after he returns to Arcetri, completely broken by the trial, she falls violently ill and dies at the age of 33. It is a devastating blow. He is left entirely in the dark, physically and emotionally. He is mourning his beloved daughter, stripped of his dignity. His reputation is in ruins across Catholic Europe, and he is isolated from the scientific world he helped create. It would be entirely understandable, even expected, if he had simply laid down and faded away into history as a tragic footnote. How does a man in that position bounce back? Here is the ultimate, profound irony of the Galileo story. Banned by the Pope from talking about the grand cosmos, banned from ever looking at the stars again, Galileo turns his brilliant mind inward. He goes back to the very beginning, returning to his youth in Pisa, to the rolling balls and the swinging chandeliers. He returns to his earliest unfinished work on the mundane mechanics of motion and the structural properties of materials, working entirely from memory and old notes, dictating to young assistants who act as his eyes. He spends his final years composing his absolute, undeniable masterpiece. Discourses and mathematical demonstrations concerning two new sciences. But the Pope decreed he could never publish again, and the Inquisition monitors his mail. How does a blind prisoner under house arrest get a monumental physics textbook out to the world? It becomes a meticulously planned, high-stakes covert operation. The manuscript is smuggled out of Italy, piece by hidden piece, by sympathetic friends, visiting scholars, and underground networks. It makes its arduous way across Europe to Leiden in Holland. Holland is a Protestant country, fiercely independent, and entirely outside the legal reach of the Catholic Inquisition. There, in 1638, the renowned Elsevier publishing family prints it. This book is the ultimate revenge from the grave. The Inquisition thought they permanently silenced him by taking away the stars. But two new sciences actually becomes the true concrete foundation of all modern physics. The first new science is the science of the strength of materials. This is where he finally perfectly resolves the math he messed up as a 20-year-old, calculating the architecture of hell. He formally lays out the square cube law, explaining mathematically how beams break, how matter holds together under stress, and reducing physical engineering structures to pure mathematical formulas. He explains why giants can't exist and why an elephant needs thick legs while a spider has thin ones. The second science is kinematics, the mathematical description of local motion. This is where he finally publishes his definitive laws of falling bodies, acceleration, and the precise parabolic trajectory of artillery projectiles. He essentially proved that matter is uniform, whether it is a wooden beam on Earth or the rocky surface of the moon, and that mathematics is the underlying universal language that God used to write the very fabric of the universe. This single book is the launchpad for the next 300 years of human progress. Without two new sciences, Isaac Newton cannot build his laws of motion decades later. When Newton said he stood on the shoulders of giants, he was literally standing on the shoulders of the blind prisoner of Arcetri. Galileo's final lasting triumph wasn't in astronomy. Anyone with a good telescope would have eventually seen the moons of Jupiter. His unique, unparalleled triumph was in fundamentally proving that the chaotic, messy, unpredictable physical world could be tamed, predicted, and understood through the pure, elegant, abstract logic of geometry and mathematics. He gave humanity the instruction manual for the universe. As we pull back and look at the massive scope of this incredible arc, from a rebellious lute player's son dropping lead weights and timing chandeliers by his heartbeat in Pisa, to the ambitious, flawed courtier who blew the universe wide open with a cloudy tube of glass, to the blind, broken prisoner who smuggled the foundation of modern physics out of Italy, Galileo's life is a testament to the relentless, sometimes deeply arrogant, but ultimately unstoppable human drive to understand the reality we inhabit. He dismantled a 2,000-year-old intellectual monopoly, not just with new tools, but with an entirely new way of thinking. He taught us to trust objective observation over revered authority, to fiercely question the obvious, and to constantly seek the hidden mathematical order beneath the chaos of nature. Which leaves us with a lingering, profound question to mull over long after this exploration is done. Galileo insisted with every fiber of his being that mathematics is the true, absolute language of nature. He famously wrote that the universe is a grand book continually open to our gaze, but it cannot be understood unless one first learns to comprehend the language, which is written in triangles, circles, and geometric figures. But think about this. Is math something we invented? Is it just a highly efficient conceptual tool that our human brains evolved and created to impose order and make sense of the infinite chaos around us? Or is math something we discovered? Is it an objective truth intrinsically woven into the very physical fabric of reality itself, existing whether we are here to measure it or not? It is perhaps the most profound mystery left in science. If we ever manage to encounter intelligent, technologically advanced alien life on the other side of the cosmos, beings with completely different biology and evolutionary history, will they speak the exact same mathematical language that a 16th century Italian boy first saw hidden in the swinging of a cathedral chandelier? It really makes you wonder, what else is swinging right above our heads right now, just waiting for someone to look up and measure it differently? If this journey through the chaotic cosmos and the terrifying halls of the Inquisition changed the way you see history, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Legendary Lives Unveiled. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next historical breakdown. Your support is exactly what helps us keep bringing you the deep, untold, multi-dimensional stories behind history's greatest minds. Drop a comment below. Do you think math is invented or discovered? We'd love to read your theories. Until next time, keep looking up and keep questioning everything.